good afternoon, good evening, wherever you join today. I'm Wolfgang. I'm a data consultant working at a data consultancy called ACP Cubido in Austria. And I'm here today to talk about Purview data catalog and the extensibility and the Apache Atlas API and REST APIs and many other different things. I would like to guide you through the options how to extend the data governance, the data catalog part of Microsoft Purview. I'm active on social media. If you have any questions today, please put them into the chat. If you have any questions afterwards, my email address is there. If you want to read more about Purview, I'm blogging occasionally, and I do have a quick start series about Purview on my YouTube channel. Okay. Today, we are here for the Microsoft Purview Days. Thanks to the organizers, thanks to the sponsors that we are able to spend a full day with the Microsoft Purview universe. And if you have any questions, now for the session, put them into the chat, please. And there are questions for you. There is a raffle at the end of the event, and you can win some very good prizes. And also, if you want to help the organizers for their special cause initiative, well, it's the QR code in here and the link. With that, back to the topic. Today, I would like to talk about the extensibility and the custom options or customized options within Microsoft Purview Data Catalog. And now the big question is, what is this data catalog, this data governance part of the overall Microsoft Purview universe? Last year, well, Microsoft not only changed the name from Azure Purview into Microsoft Purview, also many different services were included under one single umbrella, the Microsoft Purview umbrella. And now the question is, what is this data catalog part of the Microsoft Purview family? Well, it's a thing where you can scan your data sources, your data silos, your databases, your data lakes, your other services that are there to store and process data within your environment. And they are called sources within the Microsoft Purview data governance context. And what we need is we need to define scanners. And scanners are there to do the technical inventory of your sources, read the schemas, read the tables, read the columns, get the data types, and put them into an order and put them into a structure. What is also there, it's the classification process. And that is the process where Purview, and that's the only part of the story where Purview really reads and has a look on your data. So the classification has a look on your, for example, customers table in a database, does a scanning of some records, compares them to some rules like regular expressions, and if those rules match, a classification is applied. For example, that's an email address, that's a city name, that's an Austrian passport number, and so on and so forth. The combination of technical inventory classification is built, and the output is called the data map. The data map itself, it's a graph. So everything is connected within that data map. We've got a database. We've got the schemas. So there's a relationship between those. We've got the tables within the schema. There's a relationship in between. And also there's a relationship, a node, and an edge added to the data map whenever there's a classification applied to a column or to a table. And everything is built to give you a comprehensive view on your data. And what you can do with the data stored in the data map, well, you can use the data cataloging part in Microsoft Purview Data Governance to search for the data in your data map. So customer data. Where is my customer data located? What you can also do, you can provide some more business meaning. A business glossary is implemented within Purview, and you can use the business glossary functionality to not only define the technical classification, that's an email address, but more in a more generic way. For example, that's a customer. So we define a glossary item that is called customer. We've got the definition in there, and you can apply those glossary items to your data asset. As I mentioned, data assets, well, those are the main information pieces in your data catalog, in your data map. A database table, for example, can be a data asset. Now, whenever your data map is built, you can use data insights, data estate insights, reporting based on your data map, reporting based on your curation process, on your curation percentage. How many of my data assets are already classified? How many of them are missing some classification and so on? And there are also relationships to outside systems, not only as sources like databases and data lakes, but also to Azure Synapse Analytics or Data Factory. You can connect a Purview account to your Data Factory and search the data catalog. You get the list of data assets and you can directly create a data set, for example. And there's also one extensibility thing, the Open API. The Apache Atlas API. And that is the thing I will spend the rest of the session on. It's an open source standard. It's, well, the data governance standard. And Purview understands, talks, and is able to work with Apache Atlas API requests. I will talk about Apache Atlas in the next minutes for sure and get deeper into that topic. But back to the overall architecture. We've got data sharing included. So we can use the data asset definition out of the data map and define a secure way of data sharing. Azure Data Share, it's now included in Microsoft Purview. And we've got data policies. We've got the data assets, we've got the database tables, the databases in our data map, and we can define data policies. Who is allowed to read that part of the database? Who is allowed to do DevOps actions on that database server? They can be defined in the Purview Studio and can be published to the database, for example. So that is the overall architecture. That's the data governance world of Microsoft Purview. And today, as I said, that's the main thing I will talk about. It's the Purview, not the Purview, it's the Apache Atlas API. Whenever we are working with Purview, it's a web page. We get the main access. It's the Purview Studio. We've got the menu over there. I will show a short demo, but the Purview Studio is the main entrance to the Purview data. Let's call it that way. And in our data map, in our data catalog, we've got the data assets. A data asset can be a file in a data lake. It can be similar files in a data lake structure, or it can be, as depicted here, an Azure SQL table. And everything is connected. So, for example, let's start here. We've got the collection path. The collections are logical groupings within our Purview account, so we can define a hierarchy. We've got one root hierarchy, we've got the business intelligence part, we've got databases in there, and the collections are a way to give permissions to the data assets in the data catalog. Next, it's the hierarchy, which is below. We've got the relationship starting from the table itself, a relationship to the schema, a relationship to the database, and a relationship to the database server itself. Glossary terms, those are the more business definitions. That's a preferred customer. And we've got a definition, what is a preferred customer? And last but not least, well, it's the overall properties of our data assets. We've got some asset description, we've got some managed attributes, classifications. And those schema classifications, those are either auto-applied, or I can, if I do have the right and permission to do it, edit the data asset and add more information to that data catalog. And we will simulate the edit process that can be done using the Purview Studio, using API access, using the Apache Atlas API, because everything that Purview Studio does you can do with the API on your own. So data assets, it's the main thing we talk about. And then we've got the glossary items. Already talked about those. Glossary items can be defined in hierarchy. So I've got a business partner definition. I've got a more specialized definition of a customer. I've got a preferred customer, supplier, and so on. We can put those definitions in a different state. There are templates available with all the properties that a glossary item needs to be defined with, those required informations. And we can also define some people lists that are the experts, that are the data stewards for the glossary items. In order to get the information out of the source system into Purview, it's the scanning process. And that is also a thing in the Purview Studio, where we see the history of the scans, where we see how many data assets have been discovered, how many data assets has been classified, and so on and so forth. So data assets only get into the Purview data map through a scan definition. And we've got data lineage. One of my favorite parts. I started my career in data warehousing, and for many different questions we get from our customers, it's where does that data come from? And that's data lineage. So where does the data where is the data initially created? What are the different processing steps? And what is the overall target destination of the data lineage itself? And what you can see here, those are data assets like the central customer list. And we've got some processes in between, load from Lake, load from CRM, and we've got some different steps in the data lineage up to the Power BI dataset, as you can see here. You can also start manual curation. I already talked about that one. If you have the permission, you can switch to edit mode. You can apply glossary items, classification, descriptions, and so on and so forth. You can even define and add your custom lineage. And that is a good way if you want to start with, okay, I've got two database tables, and I know that there's a process, but Purview doesn't understand the process, how's it implemented. You can add manual lineage in there. That is a good way if you have one or two connections, but if you have multiple collections, or maybe you've got an ETL system that is metadata based, you can use the Apache Atlas API to put those lineage information in a batch into your Purview Studio, or not Purview Studio, into the data map. But the big question is, with the manual curation, that's nice if you have a small, limited amount of data updates you have to perform. But if you have the need for automation, for bulk actions, or maybe the other way around, to get some reporting out of the Purview environment, the Purview Studio is not there to provide bulk actions. There is a select many data assets option, but the actions you can put on those selected ones, those are really limited. So there is the need for some automation. There is the need for maybe starting some bulk actions on your data assets, and that can be done, with APIs. And now some basic stuff about APIs. Maybe you've heard about APIs, maybe you've not heard about APIs. And that part is for those that haven't heard about APIs. What is an API? Well, it's an application programming interface. And we've got many different services, many different software components running on different machines, and they need to know how they can communicate with each other. And an application programming interface, an API, is a way for two or more programs to communicate with each other. And as it's important to talk the same language, I could switch to Austrian German, and maybe some of you would be able to understand some pieces, but if we switch to a common language, it's easier to talk to each other. And that's the way of application programming interfaces, APIs. we define how we can communicate with each other. And there are many, many different ways how APIs can be structured. Today, I will focus on REST APIs. And REST APIs are the technical foundation for Apache Atlas REST APIs, for Purview REST APIs, many, many different REST APIs in Azure, many, many different REST APIs that are used in many, many other different applications. So REST APIs, application programming interface, plus the representational state transfer APIs. So what does it mean? Well, it's an architecture to design web services. And there are some important points. And if you really want to get into more a deep definition of REST APIs, well, there are sessions, there are workshops about those. But every resource has an identifier. So what we start with is the URL, AdventureWorks. And then we've got the definition of an entity. So we talk about orders. And at the end, at the URL, we've got, let's switch to blue here, we've got an identifier. So whenever I talk within the context of a REST API using that URL, I talk about AdventureWorks data, I talk about orders, and I talk about order number 1. Another rule, clients need to exchange information. And that exchanged information is mainly based on JSON format. So whenever we want to enter an order number 1 into our system, having an order value of $99.9, one product, one quantity sold, we can use that JSON to send it to the database. Another question is, what are those REST APIs for? Can they be used to only read data or to modify data? Well, they can be used in both ways because there are different API operations. We can use the GET operation to retrieve information. We can use POST or PUT commands to create or replace new resources. And we can even, if we have the permission, delete resources the other way around. So if we have a short look at the different ways. If we use the URL customers and we use a POST command, well, we create a new customer. If we use GET without an identifier here, we retrieve all customers. Contrary, if we put the identifier here, we can retrieve the details for customer number 1. Next step, we can even combine those entity paths. It really depends on the REST API, how's it implemented. But in many, many cases, we can get from the customers to the customer number 1 and adding orders to that URL. Well, we can get all, if we use a GET command, all orders for customer number 1. We can also remove, if we use the delete command, to remove all orders for customer number 1. So it's a very powerful way. Different operations, we can use JSON, we've got identifiers. So that is the thing we have to remember for REST APIs. Now, more specific, Apache Atlas API, the one box on the bottom, which is there for the open data exchange for the Purview that we can use and maybe start some batch processing in the Purview environment. So what is the Apache Atlas API? It's a data governance and metadata framework, initially built for Hadoop, but now it's, I would call it the overall open source standard for data governance frameworks. And you can build by using the Apache Atlas API and the Apache Atlas system to build a catalog of data assets. You can classify and govern these assets, and you can provide collaboration. Sounds similar to the options we've got in Purview Studio. And that is because Purview understands and talks the language of Apache Atlas. Well, we can use those definitions. There are some key features. There are some really, really important features when we talk about the Apache Atlas API. It's metadata type based. So I've got a slide about that. But if you're coming from programming, object-oriented class definitions, well, we've got types on the other side. We can add and have classification. Data lineage is there. We can use the APIs to search the data catalog. And there is also a part that deals with security and data masking. The last one, that one, it's not implemented as of today in the Purview environment. Short overview. What is really important is, well, the data is stored in a metadata store. That is the Apache Atlas high-level architecture. And what I really want to show you here, it's based and stored in a graph database. So now we close the loop. Everything is connected in the data map in Purview, as I said, because it's based on Apache Atlas. Everything is a graph. Good. Next. Let's talk about the Atlas type system. I talked or mentioned if you're coming from object-oriented programming, when we talk about types or classes, those are the definitions. What are the attributes? For example, a database table definition should support, well, that is the type definition. So it's a database table, and the database table has a name, a database table has attributes, so and so forth. An instance or a type definition has some sort of attributes. As I said, the name, the owner, whatever. Those concrete instances, database table, customers in that specific database, that is called an entity. On the object-oriented side, it's called an object, an instance. And we've got the relationships between those different attributes, not the attributes, but the entities, like my database relates to a server. In that server, in the database, we've got some schemas. Those are relationships. Call them references and pointers. So how are the types defined in Apache Atlas? It's in the types definition, that is the JSON format. We've got the definition for an Azure SQL database, and we've got the definition for the attributes. So collation, I put only a small part over here. What is also very important, we can use inheritance. So we define some more generic types, and we can reuse the definition. For example, the Azure SQL database definition within Purview, it's based on the more general definition of an Azure resource and of a database. So those definitions can be reused. If we look at the Azure resource, we've got the subtypes, everything that is well, based below, every type that is really based on the Azure resource definition. And we've got the asset, and that is the, let's call it super type. That is the all generic data asset definition, and that has all the most important attributes in there. Relationships, they are also defined in the type definition. On the upper right corner, we've got the screenshot from the Purview Studio, but also defined in the JSON definition of the type definition. We've got the relationship between an Azure SQL server to the Azure SQL databases. Relationship, just a short recap, we've got a database, or a SQL server has some databases. Databases do have schemas. Schemas contain tables or other objects, and tables contain columns. The other way around, we've got a reference from a column to a table, from a table to a schema, from a schema to a database, and from the database to a server. And everything is there in the JSON definition in there. I will upload the slides, or I don't know if the organizers will distribute the slides and share that you can have a closer look at the definition of the thing. And now the instances, the data assets. On the left side of the screen, we've got the screenshot from Purview Studio. On the right side, I've got the JSON format, the JSON representation of that specific data asset. And now the question is, how do they work together, Purview and Apache Atlas? Well, we've got a huge list of documentation for the APIs, and I just move my browser over here. If you search for Apache Atlas REST APIs, you get all the available REST methods. There is a discovery REST API. There's a glossary REST API. You can use the lineage REST API to query the lineage to put more information in there. So that is the open source standard, but you can also have a look at the definition that Purview supports. And there are different ways. There are REST APIs to create new Purview accounts. There are REST APIs to create new collections, but there are also data accounts. So where we can have a look at the data lineage, for example, where we can use the REST API to query the lineage graph. And it's similar structure as I've shown you. We've got the definition, and then we've got the information. I would like to talk about lineage. And I've got a GUID shortcut over here. That is the actual GUID. That is the identifier of the data asset I would like to talk with. So there are many different ways to start with the Purview REST APIs, including more general Purview definitions, but also those Apache Atlas-based ones to query data assets and so on. You need an endpoint, and that endpoint it's not hidden, it's there in the properties of your Purview account. Within the Azure portal, you can go to your Purview account, properties, and the Apache Atlas endpoint, it's there. So that is the main part we need to use in here. And now let's start with the first demo. I've prepared some Postman demos. I don't know if you know Postman. Postman is an application where you can test and call REST APIs. And what I've prepared here are some examples how we can work with the Purview REST API. What we need initially, it's security. So we need a BIRA token. The BIRA token you can see here, grab it. It's not valid within or in an hour. So you can just grab that one. It won't work afterwards. So we need to get the BIRA token. And then I've got an example request over here for the get method, which talks with the types definition. So I talk about types and the type definitions. Nothing else, no body added. So it's only query the list of available types in here. And what we get back, it's the list, a long list. So we've got, I don't know, 173,000 lines of code, JSON code that defines all the definitions of the types within our Purview environment. So if we search for Azure SQL in here, we see the definition for Azure SQL managed instance. And that is, it's the definition of an SQL MI view column. And that is the service type that is related over here. So query the information of the types. We can also query the glossary. So the glossary on that part, which looks a little bit different if we move over here. So we've got the glossary over here. We've got the terms in there. If we query it using the Apache Atlas API, we get the JSON structure over here. We can also query an entity or the details of a specific entity. And now it's getting not more tricky, but we've got the endpoint over here. We've got the entity type. So I talk about data entities. And now what is really the thing, we need to add a GUID. That GUID is the unique identifier, which is there. If you don't know the GUID, we can list all the entities in there. We could use the discovery endpoint, but we can also use the Purview Studio but we search for a specific where we search for a specific entity over here. Let's go over here, take the reporting customers, and that GUID is hidden in the URL over there. So that is the thing what we need. Next, we can also put it the other way around to add some information to the glossary. So what we can do and what we need, it's the body. And the Postman samples are there to show you the overall capabilities of the REST APIs. But what is more important is there are some really cool programming libraries. Postman is there to test it out, to try it out, not to automate it. But if you really want to automate it, it's like the wrong browser. There is a package called Apache Atlas. It was added to the chat in there, and it's on the one of the next slides. It's a wrapper around the Apache Atlas REST APIs. And what you can do when you are able to talk Python, and even if you are not able to talk Python, there's a huge list of samples over there. So you can start and query your Purview environment using programming interfaces based on Python. There are also other ways. There is a command line interface for the Apache Atlas API. There are C# libraries available, but I would like to show you a short demo about and with the Apache Atlas. So what we need, now the question is it, zoom in a little bit. So what we need to import the libraries to talk with the other side and the Apache Atlas core APIs. And I will show you some demos to query information, but also on the other hand, to add some information to your Purview Studio. So what we need to authenticate. So what I create here, it's my Azure credentials that I need here. And then first demo, we can query the information. Put that here, and let's see, everything else. I have to comment that one out. Sorry about that. Yeah, looks good. Let's start that one. Let's sign here. That looks good. Move to Visual Studio Code over here. Should have done that before. So I will show you the code over there. Let's wait for that to finish. What we've got an instance of a Purview client, and I call the get all type definition. And what we get back, it's all type definitions. It's a string, and we can output that format within a nicely way formatted JSON into that. What we can also do is we can query one specific type definition, type category, and add a name. So we can search the metadata in there. What we can also do is we can use the glossary part of the Purview Studio and the Purview data map. We can call the get glossary term method, adding the glossary GUID. We can add more glossaries in the Purview environment. So we need to specify which glossary we are working with, and we can need to add the glossary term ID. On the other hand, what is more interesting, it's not only the querying, but we can also modify the content of our data catalog. What we can do is we can create a new custom process. And I can create a new custom process which is called Wolfgang copy process, which inherits from the generic process definition. So that is the inheritance, sub and subtypes. We can define some attributes for that, the copy reason, and some more details. What we need to do in order that Purview knows we've defined a new type definition, we need to upload that type definition to the Purview environment. And that's the starting point, but we don't have any concrete instances. We don't have any real data assets in there, no real process instance. So what you can do, we can create a new instance of Atlas process. Why Atlas process? Because we've got the inheritance defined for our custom process. We define a new name for that. We define the type name. And what we need is for data lineage to work, we've got some inputs and we've got some outputs. And we can add and set the attributes over here. That is that. And client upload entities. That is the thing. What comes as a result is if we move here and use Purview Studio to move to the browsing interface, we can browse by collection, but we can also browse by source type. And what you see here, I've got one instance of Wolfgang copy process in there, and I've got the Wolfgang sample process session. Let's go over here. And what you see in the properties is the copy reason and some more details in the Purview environment. Last 2 minutes remaining. We started like 5 minutes late. Is it okay that I get 1 or 2 minutes?
Yeah, totally fine. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So that is one thing. What you can also do using the Apache Atlas libraries, for example, you can add new type definitions that are not supported by Purview out of the box. I've seen a comment in the chat that somebody has implemented source systems that weren't supported. Well, I've got Azure Analysis Services in there. I've got the definition of an Azure Analysis Server in there. I've got the definition of the definitions. We've got 2 models in my server. We've got the database tables in there, and that is all put into the Purview, Purview Studio. So that is one thing. We can put more definitions into the pieces, but we can also query the information that is in Purview data map. We can use different ways. We can use Postman to get the information, but we can also use, for example, Azure Data Factory to query all the glossary terms. So what I've prepared here, it's, let's go over here. It's a definition to query the types. So we query the REST APIs, the Apache REST APIs, and store the information in a data lake. And what we can do based on that, well, we can use Power BI to visualize the information in our Purview data map. There are the built-in reports. Well, they are there. But what you can do is you can build your own analytics system based on the extracted information. We can have a look at all the service types that are in there. For example, SAP has a definition in there. We can also have a look at the classifications, the system ones, the custom ones. We can also have a look at the relationships, all the relationships between the Azure SQL database, the schemas, the tables, and so on. But what I really like is we can build our statistics report based on the growth of our data map, based on the different collections, the sizes, and so on. So we can query everything that is there in there, store it, and build a data warehouse on that. What we can also do is we can visualize the scan history. That one is not available in the Purview Studio itself. that is only there in a list. But we can do, and we can also have some KPIs. Okay, I had 2 scans with an error. What we can also do, it's Power BI. Let's add some tooltips in there to see how many assets were discovered, how long did it take, and so on and so forth. So that is the other way round. We can query all the information that is in there in the Purview environment. And to wrap it up, there are the different REST APIs. We can talk to the instances. We can create new collections. We can create new Purview environments, Purview collections, but we can also query the catalog data, and that is the part where the Apache Atlas API is hidden. We've got the demos, well, the REST APIs. We can trigger scans even through the Postman or the REST API call. We can query the data using Data Factory, put it into Power BI. And what we can also do is, well, you've seen it in the demo, PyApache Atlas. It's very powerful, and I've seen we've got a contributor in the chat that worked on the demo I've shown you for Azure Analysis Services. So that is open source. If you have time, if you know Python, just help the contributors. I really like that one. And also, it's not the end. There are other ways to talk with Purview using the Purview command line interface, the Apache Atlas, and so on. So to wrap it up, the Purview user interface, the Purview Studio, it's not the end. It's the start. But if you want automation, you need to have a look at the Apache Atlas. If you have source systems that are not covered out of the box by Purview, you need to have a look at Apache Atlas. And if you are familiar with REST APIs, they are simple. Well, the operations I've shown you on my slide, there are more operations. It's not only the get, there is a list operation, there are other operations, but the most important one I've put on my slides. And Python, it's not the end. It's not Postman that can do the work, that can only do the work. You can use C#, you can use a command line interface, you can use PowerShell, you can use Python. So the world and the sky is open to you. And with that, thanks for attending the session. Thank you for the sponsors. And the next session is Victor. And if there are any questions, there are questions in the chat. As I'm at the end of the time, I will answer them in the chat. Thanks for attending. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any more questions, here are my contact details again. And would really enjoy it if you subscribe to my YouTube channel. There will be more Purview videos coming in the future too. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Treat your data better, as I like to say, and happy data governance. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We learned lots of new things today. Yeah, thanks a lot again. So folks, if you have any questions, you can ask into the